It is now being recorded as we speak. So again, thank you for joining us. You'll be hearing today from, well, I don't know how many lunch and learns are just right on time for and perfectly targeted for the weather outside, but on extreme heat resilience, something we're all dealing with in a lot of ways. So we will be hearing today from the DEP's Office of Climate Resilience in support of the New Jersey Interagency Council on Climate Resilience Action Plan. The Interagency Council on Climate Resilience is currently developing an extreme heat resilience action plan and would like to increase their engagement of municipal officials. So I believe today is, I don't know if it's the first part of that process, but hopefully it is a part of an ongoing process, and the league is glad to be a partner with the department, and hopefully will continue to do so in future sessions and additional programs. Our speakers today, first, Natalie Augusto Filion, who serves as the Deputy Chief Climate Resilience Officer for the NJDEP. In this capacity, she works with the Chief Resilience Officer, Nick Angerone, who you also hear from, and the Office of Climate Resilience team to accelerate the implementation of the statewide resiliency policy and programs in partnership with the New Jersey Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. We will also be hearing from Becky Hill, who manages the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning, including the implementation of the Resilient NJ program, and manages New Jersey's Coastal Management Program for NJDEP. And as I mentioned, Nick Angerone, who is New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer and the manager of the Office of Climate Resilience at the NJDEP. And in this capacity, he coordinates the statewide resiliency policy as Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience and leads the direct development and implementation of the statewide climate change resilience strategy, as well as providing technical guidance and technical support to, among others, local governments in their plans to address climate change. So before I turn this over to Natalie, Becky, and Nick, again, some housekeeping items. We'd like to have this be interactive. So if you have a question, please use the raise your hand function. For some reason, if it's not working for you, you can also drop it in the chat and we'll keep an eye out for you. This recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be made available afterwards, and they'll be available on a link on the league's website. And again, with any questions, the first option would be to raise your hand. I'm Mike Serra, if I didn't introduce myself to you, the league's executive director, and it's been our pleasure to work with the DEP on a number of these lunch and learns, and I think you'll find this to be informative. So with that, Natalie, would you like to take over, please?
So Mike, I'm going to start us off.
Okay, all right.
So good afternoon, everybody. As Mike noted, I'm Nick Angerone, New Jersey's, or Nick Angerone. Mike Angerone is my father. Nick Angerone, New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer. I'm going to go through very quickly some background with kind of how we ended up here, working with the Interagency Council, and then I'm going to turn it over to Natalie, who's going to go into some detail about the Resilience Action Plan. And I'll note that we are going to ask that we hold questions to the end. We do have about 25 minutes on the schedule, which I think we should be able to get to your questions. And I'll simply say thank you ahead of time to Shimei from my staff, who is handling the slides, and say that we can go ahead. All right, so the basis for this initiative and most of the resilience work that we are doing these days was Governor Murphy's Executive Order 89. He signed that EO back in October of 2019, and it did a number of things, not the least of which was establishing my position, as well as the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. The executive order required us to do a few things. Again, one of the first things we did was develop a scientific report on climate change, which we issued in June of 2020, and I always suggest that you go and take a look at, as well as a statewide climate change resilience strategy, which I'll touch on in a moment. I think what's often overlooked from that executive order is that for the first time, the governor made it clear that it was the policy of the state of New Jersey that executive branch agencies take proactive, and I'm going to read this, take proactive and coordinated efforts to protect public health and safety and to promote and protect the physical, economic, and social vitality and resilience of New Jersey's communities from the current and anticipated impacts of climate change. It seems like something logical, right, that state government would be doing, but it is an order directly from the governor directing us to do that. Go ahead, Shimei. As I've noted, I serve as the Chief Resilience Officer. In that role, I am the Vice Chair of the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. The governor's office, a representative from the governor's office is the chair of that group. The interagency, when it was first established, based on that executive order, was 17 state departments and agencies. We've since expanded it, and so we're talking about 22 separate state agencies and departments, all looking to coordinate their actions around climate resilience. Go ahead. Okay, so that the statewide climate change resilience strategy, which I referenced. And so we developed this, right, largely while we were in the midst of the pandemic, but we released this strategy in October of 2021. And thank you to those of you who engaged with us during that period and who supported development of that strategy. Within that strategy, there are 6 priority areas which are displayed on the screen, and I'm not going to go into them. There are 127 recommendations and actions within that strategy, and I think I'm hoping that you can see from kind of the focus areas, right, that we're really talking about a very broad definition of resilience and the types of agency or the types of actions necessary. So what I always remind folks is that the strategy is a policy framework, right, that includes forward-looking state policies that address some of our vulnerability to climate impacts and help us strengthen resilience in the state. It is focused on the things that state agencies, state executive branch agencies and departments can do in this regard. It is not a plan or a strategy that goes into sufficient detail to tell you specifically how you should be acting, although I think there's significant alignment if you have the chance to go through that. Go ahead, Deshmay. All right, and one of the most important things that the strategy did, and one of the things that we get questions a lot about, is it defined what resilience means for New Jersey. And those of you who are remotely active in this space will recognize that the definition is really a melding of, resilience and adaptation, right? So indicating that we're not just bouncing back from events, but we're bouncing forward. We're not just recovering, we're improving so that we are less impacted by future events going forward. So that's quick background. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie, who's going to go into more detail about the Extreme Heat Resilience Action Plan, and we'll go into getting your feedback.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks to the League and all of you for participating in this call today. As Mike mentioned at the beginning, this is relatively early in our engagement process, and that we want to, hear from folks on the ground that are ultimately helping to implement some of the work that's needed. As we know, all adaptation is local, and if we're going to be advancing this work successfully, it is in partnership with you all. So let me start by just giving you a tiny bit of an overview of the resilience action plans. Our plan for the day today is that I will go through these slides in about 10-15 minutes quickly so that we can jump into an active conversation. And as Mike sort of previewed, for anyone that maybe is just joining the call, we would like to make this an interactive session, sort of hear from you. We have some questions prepped for your input and feedback. So while the resilience strategy is meant to provide recommendations on how the state agencies are advancing resilience work, it is not prescriptive. It is not, specific to the level of what programs should change or should be doing. It doesn't put a timeline on our recommendations. And so it was very clear to us in wanting to advance adaptation work in the state, resilience work in the state, that we wanted to start developing these resilience action plans. In a minute, I'm going to drop into the chat a link to where you can find the scoping document that provides a good deal more detail on the resilience action plans and what they're intended to be. It looks like I may have sent that as a image file. Can someone confirm that that link actually dropped in the chat correctly? I believe so.
It is showing up as an image file. We'll get the link in, Natalie. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. Our intent as a council is to release, a series of these focused on areas of concern for us as a state. And this slide just provides, Shemay, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slides, pretty please. It provides us just a general outline of what the plans are meant to look like. We're asking each agency to consider how they, from the sort of scope of controls and the jurisdictional authorities that they have, can incorporate climate resilience and relevant work to protect ourselves from impacts into the policies and decision-making frameworks that is focused on a specific topic. So while this first resilience action plan is on extreme heat, just flagging that there will be additional focus areas that the configurations of state agency partners will advance. We want to be clear about what actions are being identified and what they're meant to accomplish while maintaining a level of detail that doesn't really get back down onto specific facilities or, very specific items, but allows us all to find those interconnected spaces, those cross-cutting themes around issues of funding and financing and directing investments in a resilient way, ensuring that we're always centering equity for our communities, recognizing that there are research gaps in our understanding of how climate impacts and our projections and our data sort of show us, we're always wanting to be evidence-based, and as is the core purpose of the Interagency Council, ensuring coordinated governance so that we're sort of all singing from the same playbook. This next series of slides shows a little bit of an overview of what we're talking about when it comes to extreme heat. Certainly there are the summer heat waves. There's some really high temperature records, expectations for this Friday, Saturday. All of you at the municipal level are quite used to sort of alerting the public about safety tips and strategies for making sure that people are doing the right thing and not putting themselves in harm's way when it comes to those very hot days. When you take a big step back, we are warming. Our temperature observations over the last 125 years since New Jersey has been keeping temperature observations shows a trend towards warming. And not only that, we are outpacing the rest of the Northeast region. In the last year, many of you may recall that summer of 2022 was one of the hottest summers since we started taking temperature records in 1895. And if you go into the next slide, sort of a different way of visualizing this information through a bar graph, where we see a history of average annual temperatures, right? So erasing the nuance of the specifics of where we are in the state, but just on an average since 1895, very clear trends towards warming. Global temperature records in the same exact time period has shown an increase of 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. In New Jersey, the average temperature increase is 3.5 degrees over the same exact period of time. So what does this mean for us? This next slide is sharing a little bit about the findings from our human health and communities addendum to the scientific report that Nick mentioned was released back in 2021. So this addendum goes into detail about the ways in which our communities and the sort of the public health challenge that is associated with climate change. So heat acts as a threat multiplier. It leads to an increased rate of heat-related illnesses and unfortunately mortality. When you combine increased temperatures with humidity and precipitation, you can find issues of infectious disease spread. Also, just from an air quality perspective, the higher the temperature, the more likely we are to be forming ground level ozone, which is a major component of smog that can lead to asthma and other sort of chronic pulmonary challenges. And certain populations are most vulnerable, right? When we're talking about elderly folks who maybe have limited capacity or homebound, potentially in homes that don't have air conditioning, folks with chronic health conditions, anyone who works outside, and children, you know, folks whose bodies haven't fully developed to be able to thermoregulate the way adults do. As I mentioned, heat is one of those issues that is and maybe I actually didn't mention this here, but it's sometimes considered the silent killer in that it doesn't have the sort of shock numbers that we associate with other kinds of disasters that just cover the news. These are the kinds of issues that, because of all of the confounding public health factors, may be causing folks to make it to the emergency room. If we go on to the next slide, I want to share a little bit that obviously extreme heat is not just a public health or a human health issue. It affects the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, even the roads that we drive on. And as you'll see from this slide, you know, we recognize that we do have to work across state government to ensure that every sector and every agency is contributing to a more resilient New Jersey to extreme heat. So in the next couple slides, I'm providing essentially a summary of some desktop research that we undertook to understand what other states are doing when it comes to very focused and intentional planning around extreme heat issues. And for the most part, the ways in which this information is organized fall into these three buckets, right? We want to understand how heat is affecting the folks that are most vulnerable, how heat is affecting our built environment, and how heat trends are changing our natural systems and our expectations around crop cycles and issues of species migration, etc. And on the next slide, you'll see a sort of grouping of outcomes. When you develop any kind of action plan or initiative, you are looking to make sure that people understand that this is an issue, that there's a greater degree of awareness about this issue, that we understand where our most vulnerable people and assets are located, that we are retrofitting where possible and improving our coordination, and then making really intentional improvements in the way that we develop policies or standards to protect the folks that are most impacted and to increase the capacity at the local scale. And as mentioned before, to ensure that the communities that are hardest hit, which are often our sort of more marginalized, overburdened, underserved communities, are getting the support that they need. In this next slide, we took a graphic that was developed as part of a national climate assessment that really called out some of the groups who are most disproportionately affected by climate-related hazards. This figure is not specific to heat, but we see a lot of the same kinds of populations being folks that certainly municipalities are thinking about meeting the needs of, and obviously as climate resilience practitioners, we are thinking about the needs of. So we are chatting all with you all today in the hopes of getting some of that nuance, right? While the state agencies are sort of looking inward at what programs, initiatives, projects can be improved or adapted or amended to really become a more resilient New Jersey. That's sort of the side of the formula that relates to how state agencies are organized. There's the side of the formula that relates to how you all experience these needs on the ground. And so in just a minute, we'll pivot into that conversation sort of phase. Before doing that, I just want to bring up a few slides that are a quick compilation of the kinds of populations that we consider to be vulnerable. Obviously, there's a lot of information in this slide. We expect and hope that when you receive these slides after the meeting, that it might trigger some additional thinking, and we invite you to sort of stay in conversation with us about these issues as more ideas are coming up for how you think state agencies should be, addressing these needs. On the next slide, you'll see the kinds of natural systems that are impacted. And last but not least, the kinds of built infrastructure or built environment or infrastructure systems that we are, being really intentional about sort of paying attention to through the development of this resilience action plan. And with that, I do recognize that I spoke fairly quickly. There might be some hands. And so I will pivot to Mike to help us in the stacking of questions that are coming through. But what we're looking for is feedback from you. And what we can do here is sort of take these questions in turn. Our intention was to spend maybe 25 minutes total hearing from you all on this call about the ways in which heat is affecting you and your constituents, where the areas of concern are for you on the ground, how this is showing up in terms of the way you address these issues and the resources that you bring to bear, what you wish you could do differently, and certainly what you wish state agencies were doing differently to be able to help meet those needs on the ground. We are going to pause that conversation at about 12:55, just in the last 5-10 minutes, allow some space to just give you all a little bit more information about what the Office of Climate Resilience does. And so just a note that we will try and pivot into that kind of broader conversation so that you guys are aware of not just the Resilience Action Plan work, but all of the other good work that's happening through our Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning and our Blue Acres team, et cetera. So let me pause there and ask Mike, do you have a preferred strategy? Do you want to start with questions from the chat and then ask people to raise their hands?
Sorry about that. I was muted. I don't see any questions. The only question in the chat was regarding was directed to me about the presentation, and we'll have the video and the presentation posted. I don't see any questions in the chat, and I don't see any raised hands. Actually, I'm sorry. R. Foster just raised your hand. So you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Or an answer to one of these questions on the screen. Go ahead.
Okay. On the grouping of where potential major hazards could be, I noticed that communities of color was highlighted in there. And I was wondering also, are we looking at Superfund sites, those companies that left untaken care of chemicals that end up getting into our water stream, as well as with climates changing and all of that, that it's getting into the atmosphere? How will that be dealt with? Or is that a part of this program, what we're going to be looking at as well?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I'm hearing sort of two separate questions built in there. So just naming that certainly the social science and the emergency preparedness sort of world of review and after actions and whatnot often show that communities of color are some of the folks who receive post-disaster services at the least sort of fast rate. So being really intentional about ensuring that we're creating strategies that meet those needs of folks in those communities. Although it's not a perfect overlap, often we find that what are called urban heat islands are sort of geographical areas where the heat is considerably higher because of built asphalt, because of a lot of buildings in a small space that are maybe like closing off wind channels, the lack of green space. All of those things are often congregated with our communities of color as well. And then to your second question, I'm hearing a little bit about concerns related to groundwater and contamination in groundwater, which is outside of the scope of an extreme heat resilience action plan. But separate and apart from that, the folks at DEP who are part of our sort of contamination and site remediation have a number of strategies that they've started to brainstorm for potential inclusion in the resilience action plan, including looking at whether and how our heat trends are impacting our ability to sort of meet those cleanup needs. Nick, I'll pivot to you and see if there's anything else you'd like to respond to that question. Thank you, Art Foster.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I guess my only minor addition is we are looking at state agencies, right? And again, DEP programs in particular are looking at whether there are things that we as state government should be, actions that we should take, looking at things such as, is increasing heat, is extreme heat going to have an impact on the areas that are either already right, polluted, Superfund sites, known contaminated sites, for example, but also facilities that are still active and who might be utilizing or storing chemicals or those types of things. And is extreme heat going to have an impact on those properties? So we're looking to identify actions to kind of evaluate that, make sure that, set up programs or initiatives to ensure that those questions are being asked. So, right, not exactly kind of the post cleanup, not exactly groundwater related, but also looking at the same types of facilities to ensure that we don't end up in a worse situation.
Thank you very much.
Seeing a question in the chat about grant consultant who has clients request grants for HVAC improvements in municipal buildings and sort of public sector buildings. So Alexa Reed, can I interpret that as like a response to the question of what are the local resources that you wish you could do more of, basically sort of retrofitting public sector buildings to be cooler?
Definitely, yeah.
Please feel free to unmute yourself.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
We have hand just popped up, A. Santos.
Hi there. I'm an environmental consultant. I work kind of in the natural resources sector with like DEP permitting in the transportation industry. And my question is, so we often are guiding our clients to look forward in their construction projects and, plan for climate change, rising sea levels, implementing like green best management practices. But oftentimes we run into kind of like pushback from the actual construction contractors who aren't as familiar with some of these requirements. So what's your kind of like outreach and like education trickling down to like out of the agencies itself to the more general public and people that actually have to implement these actions? Because oftentimes, that's our job, is to advise people, but just kind of touching on your point that like making sure people understand like the importance of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because I think it's a really key and pivotal one, particularly when it comes to heat, because New Jersey's resilience conversation has been very much and appropriately and importantly focused on flooding, right? So these are some of the first conversations that we're having as a state around this other high, issue of concern for the state, which means that in the same way that there was a lag in getting everybody sort of aware of the need to think about, river and flooding, sea level rise, et cetera, we're now beginning those conversations, and outreach and education is a huge part of that. We have currently in the grouping of actions that have come up, there are a couple dozen sort of ways of organizing the ideas that are coming out of state agencies, with education, outreach, communications being a really large grouping of activities. Not only do folks on the ground, your contractors, implementing, bidding for projects and then developing the strategies to implement those projects, but internally to state agencies, we want to make sure that everybody has a very clear understanding of what the strategies are, right? There's a lot of different audiences that we're trying to hit. And what I would ask you in terms of, what you think is the most effective, are there particular, associations that are the trusted messengers for those contractors that you think we need to be really intentional about presenting to and asking what their needs are and how they do, CEUs with their various firms that they represent or what have you. For us, because this conversation is necessarily iterative, we're doing the internal piece and talking to folks like you all, right? So certainly agreed that trickling it down beyond the conversations that are happening inside of state agency offices with one another, and then asking for what you think would be a most effective strategy to make sure that we're reaching those folks that maybe stand up as kind of barriers when municipalities are trying to do more climate resilience projects.
I guess a follow-up question to what you just said about, like associations, like how do we reach other groups that aren't necessarily so closely tied to the state agency? So my understanding is the action plans are going to have guidance and ideas that people can pull from that they'll tailor to themselves, correct?
The action plan is state agency actions. So
Okay.
the state agency is in the position of developing guidance. We are hoping that those state agencies are doing that to the audiences that are their constituency. Right. And then from that would spur, I would hope, initiatives that are really targeted educational initiatives. At the moment, if I'm just going through like my mental Rolodex of actions, there's a lot focused on helping the general public and vulnerable populations, folks that are most like sort of from a public health perspective impacted by building the education and the awareness building in that space. But I don't recall seeing things that are very specific. Outside of the ag sector, I think there were some actions in ag and transportation around worker safety.
Right.
Those conditions, but you're
because
naming
often with like these big projects, and like the bidding, for example, we are supposed to give the people bidding on the projects as much information as possible so that they can build kind of like the best pitch for us. So like, for example, I work with DEP, and like you said, worker safety, me working in the transportation agency, I'm thinking like, they're building a new railroad bridge. Like, can that have some sort of like nice little shaded park next to a walkway for people to escape the heat, So for me, my job, it would be great to have some sort of like guidance document with ideas that like I could pull as like a sparking point for people so that they could like use their own creativity with like those initial ideas. So that's just my little input from my stance, but
thank you so much for that. Absolutely.
thank you.
I see a couple, Amanda Khan is offering some comments in the chat related to very specific populations, assistance to the elderly and assistance to low income residents. Amanda, could I pick on you to share what's done now and what you wish you could do more of in your community? And while you're unmuting yourself, I'll say that we've had some targeted outreach conversations with folks like 211s and VOADs and COADs and those kinds of groups that are doing like immediate service deliveries and senior outreach folks. And we've had a good influx of ideas about what some of the sticking points are for folks. Just curious from the municipal perspective, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you wish you could be doing more of, or where the gap is for you. So Amanda unmuted herself. Are you able to? For now, I guess I can share that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hello.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Natalie. So more my input will be, we're a rural landscape out here in Delaware Township, and it will be more of would consider of how do we fit in the elderly into the equation, the low income into the equation, if they don't have the access or financial ability for having the apparatus for cooling and energy bill. So that will be my input of how do we have a program specifically for that area and that group.
Yeah, thank you so much. So certainly cooling costs on a fixed income, cooling costs for folks that are living below the poverty line, like, has come up a lot. Something we're, engaging in conversation with BPU and others about ensuring that, renters and others are able to access some of those services. Other ideas that have come up, just to kind of quickly reflect back to see if it jars more thinking from you, is the idea of having really targeted action happen via the folks that do Meals on Wheels, where folks that are homebound or otherwise unable to sort of get to cooling centers can have a network of folks that are keeping their eyes and ears open for the needs of our most elderly. And then, wanting to the extent possible to replicate some best practices from other states where we're seeing that cooling center locations, right? The identification of where a cooling center is needed, urban or rural or any intersection, includes strategies for transportation to and from, right? And not just overnight shelter cooling centers, but also, daytime places to escape the heat if, as they found in a study in Harlem, the buildings, like a heat wave may be over, but that building is still baking for another 24, 48 hours, because that's the time lag that there is in the system when so much heat is trapped in a residence. So thank you so much for elevating that.
Oh, terrific. Thanks for the idea and the Meals on Wheels, for having people checking on them when they have the deliveries, in addition to a very important point that you just made in regards to cooling centers. And again, our landscape is rural, and that's crucial to have certain amenities or access to our residents, the most vulnerable, would be a good priority.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that sort of partnership building. Like New York City's cooling centers are all developed and delivered in a voluntary basis. Trying to learn from other states and what we can replicate is something that we're like thick in the weeds of researching what other states are doing and what we can kind of steal and replicate here. I'm seeing in the chat a comment from John Gordon. Hello, nice to see you and hear from you. Will training for medical professionals be available to gather heat-related illness data? Okay, so this is a really good point in that heat illnesses, heat morbidity is generally considered in the public health literature to be undercounted, because maybe you go in because your asthma or chronic pulmonary disease is being triggered, or maybe you're, getting treatment for kidney disease, which our scientific reports, health addendum found is one of the most critical chronic conditions related to extreme heat. But the diagnostic code that's showing up in our tracking systems is tied to that original disease, not the fact that it was triggered by extreme heat. So this speaks to not only medical professionals, but our emergency response folks and how they code things when they're doing ER visits, or even just, emergency response visits. It's a much broader conversation. Arizona's got a lot that's way ahead of us, obviously, as Arizona would be, considering where they are in the state, way ahead of us in us trying to replicate the strategies. I can't think of anything that's in our action plan right now that focuses on that issue. So I really appreciate you, flagging it. Certainly something that we can turn back around to Department of Health, Department of Human Services, and others to ask about effective strategies that sort of gap. I'm going to keep going. I see a mosquito prevention and extermination as a comment, and then urban tree canopy stuff. So, oh wait, there's more. Rules regarding cooling centers and code red designation. Okay, so there's a lot there. I don't recall anything in some of the strategies that have been elevated about mosquito prevention extermination. Nick, I'm wondering if you have a comment on that, because that might be something we need to, or maybe Neil sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Can you help draw the link to heat for me? Because I might just be missing it. Is it about sort of like vector-borne disease spread?
Are you asking me to answer?
Yes, please. to help
Okay,
me
sure.
understand.
So I'm in Cumberland County. I'm in the Public Works Department. We already have a mosquito division in place, but what we've noticed over the last 2 years is our calls from residents, with the heat going up, our calls from residents to ask us to come out and spray our property or put tablets in the waterways has increased tremendously, because we think the mosquito breeding cycle is getting longer. So we have a bigger mosquito problem. So I was just wondering if that's been a topic on additional aid to for prevention and extermination.
And you think that's because the breeding cycle has gone longer, but also because it's the summer months and people want to be outside, and that's when they're like sort of noticing mosquitoes are most annoying, kind of both of those things.
Yeah, and like I said, if we had 150 calls for requests to come out, last year we had 300. This year, just to give it, so and we don't currently have the ability to just add manpower or equipment. It's a very expensive operation to run. So if there's additional monies or grants or anything out there that anybody knows about, that would be really helpful.
It's really helpful feedback. Thank you so much. Nick, do you want to?
All right, I was just going to note, right. I mean, the science, the background behind it, right? With our, most of the actual warming is happening during our winters, right? And so that means, yeah, we are seeing more mosquitoes, right? They're not, we're not seeing that die off that we typically would, right? And it's a significant issue with the spread of additional, aside from the annoyance of it all, right? There are health concerns around it, and so Neil, we appreciate that comment, and not something that kind of was front of mind for us here. So I think it's great and helpful for us to understand what you're all seeing on the ground.
Very, very helpful. I do see a comment from Lisa about the tree canopy program, which included information about the urban heat island map. Making this data available helps folks get more grants. Awesome. Good. Thank you, Lisa. That certainly was our intention. And even just speaking as an entity who goes after grants ourselves, right? That was something that helped us organize our thinking about, potential federal grant programs funded by bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA, I've forgotten what that acronym stands for at this point. So many acronyms. But yes, I will make one comment. We've convened an advisory group of, thought leaders, subject matter experts on extreme heat from around the country. And one comment that has really been a big takeaway for me is this realization that our sort of traditional way of understanding where heat islands are, which is tied to land surface temperatures. So when, NASA rockets fly over, they take the infrared band of that flyover data and we clean it up, remove all the cloud cover and whatever. And that's how we identify where the hottest areas are. That is not necessarily a perfect alignment of where our most vulnerable people are, or where we don't have trees, or what, it's a piece of data that needs to be taken with a grain of salt in terms of caveats. And I do know of money from the National Institutes of Health that allow municipalities to do localized temperature monitoring. And it's something that we'd like to be able to leverage, potentially DEP's air quality monitoring network. And I forget our climatologist team has also a network of folks that provide temperature record information to get a little bit more nuanced about where, heat spots, hot spots are really showing up in communities. So thank you for that feedback. If there's anything more you want to say, Lisa, I'm just going to quick time check for Mike and for Becky's benefit. I think we'll go about 7 more minutes on this.
Oh, thank you. So it'd be great if you guys could loan out sensors too. So because they're very expensive, especially the good ones. You can get not great ones for a couple $100, but you've got to calibrate them and there's so much to it. So I don't know if that's ever something you'd consider, but we don't have it in our budget to spend $4,500 on a good sensor.
Yeah. I know there's been pilots like that, but I'm not aware of a program to expand that pilot. It has pilots, but what I've seen or heard of people doing is popping something on the hood of a car and then having that car draw but that's in partnership with the university, who then does the data analysis and the modeling. So it's, thank you, Lisa, for flagging that.
Yeah,
Um, and then there's 2 comments before I come back to R. Foster about rules regarding municipalities providing cooling centers and code red designations. And folks may be aware that there's some action in the legislature to try and sort of develop out some legislative approaches for that. Anything you want to share on that, Nick? I'm not up to date on the latest on that, although I will say that that's a conversation that's underway in the state.
Yeah, so it's our understanding that the cooling centers are the responsibility of local governments. And I won't say that we are experts in kind of what those rules say or the coordination with your county or state OEM, but it is our understanding that cooling centers are municipal responsibility. As for the code red designations, right, as Natalie mentioned, there's a bill that's been proposed that I believe right now it's written to establish a pilot program to pilot code red designations. But it's something that I think is worth following and worth you all kind of providing your comments to your legislative reps about.
Thank you, Nick. I see some comments about building codes as well as rural agriculture and farm assistance and more on academy support. So DCA and HMFA are both part of the Interagency Council. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we're sort of going through that exercise of sifting through everything that that we're seeing coming in. And not only, you know, New Jersey follows the International Building Code and sort of adopts, you know, further adopts the work that is approved at that scale of governance, for lack of a better way to describe it, of that professional community. HMFA and DCA and others have really targeted funding programs that are designed to help, and EDA, I think, as well, to help sort of meet that funding gap when it comes to not only, you know, new homes and meeting the sort of affordable homes needs of, across the state. And all of those folks have been contributing ideas for how you know, how the action plan would show up. What I will say is that as we move into our more broader public comment period, it would be really great to be able to count on all of you and your networks to show up and see, as those actions are becoming more public for comment and for feedback, that you have a chance to sort of digest what agencies are starting to promote in the coming months. Anything you want to add to that, Nick? Because I don't. Thank you. I just want to get quickly through the questions, and I am going to drop into the chat that we have a sort of shared inbox that our team here at the Office of Climate Resilience is using to continue to gather feedback from you. We're also, you know, hoping to be in attendance at an upcoming climate event that the League Educational Foundation is hosting. So certainly this is not the last time to offer comment or to get back to us. So I'll put that in the chat in just one second, but I'll take, with apologies to R. Foster, who I know you had your hand up in a little bit, I'll take one last point from Mary.
I just wanted to say that in the municipality that I'm in, we have a large percentage of seniors here. And I was hoping, and quite a number of them do come to my center here, and we've done a survey and determined the ones with chronic diseases or chronic conditions, and quite a few of them do have that. And I'm hoping that our PSE&G will keep the cooling system in their home on. And in previous years, we were able to secure from the Office on Aging for the Burlington County area a few fans for those who do not have air conditions. So I'm wondering, under your grant program, will the municipalities be able to apply for grants to allow us to keep at least the people that are in communities of color and poor people, to allow them to at least have fans in their homes?
Yeah, and in some cases, fans aren't enough, right? Depending on the humidity level, we do need to recognize that you could just be circulating hot air around, right? And then have sort of a false sense of security around your ability to sort of withstand the conditions. Projecting out a couple decades into the future, the idea is that whereas
Yes.
historically we've had, I can't remember these numbers off the top of my head, so I won't quote them, but if we had a certain number of, days over 100 degrees in terms of that heat index value, then in the future, that number will continue to increase, which puts more and more people at risk, which is why we're, needing to be really intentional about this. So I'm
Yeah.
hearing from you a need for
Cooling
funding
centers.
programs, not only the cooling centers, but funding programs that help people get cooling technology in their homes. We've been trying to
Yes.
promote the idea of heat pumps that aren't sort of exacerbating a problem at the local
That's right.
level whereas air conditioners might just be spitting out hot air into the neighborhood and making it worse for the whole neighborhood. But then also the ability to run the air conditioner if you're low income. Thank you for those. And Mandy has a comment about agricultural farmers and producers to sort of adapt to warming trends and changes in the certainly all sorts of issues, water availability, growing season leads, etc. Crazy weird winters that cause our orchards to bloom too early and all those kinds of things. Again, we are carrying back all of this really valuable feedback to the rest of our agency partners to make sure that these things are called out. I recall that some of the suggestions from Ag, the Department of Agriculture focused on, partnerships to make sure that they were sort of reaching out and doing education and delivering supportive services. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot more specifics to be able to lend you, Mandy. All right, I did drop a link into the chat or, our email, our shared inbox, recognizing that this has been a really incredible conversation. And I want to make sure that folks are comfortable and confident with continuing to disseminate this information and to bring back additional ideas to our team. We have also, as we've done a number of these webinars, have asked folks essentially permission, as it were, to include your email addresses in our team's updates that go out about this and other sort of key resilience activities that are that the Office of Climate Resilience are helping to coordinate. So you will see that. If you are clear and confident you don't want to be on another newsletter, 100% heard. And so just send the link to that note that you want to be added to just updates on the Extreme Heat Resilience Action Plan, because obviously that distribution list that we use include other things like potential grant opportunities and things, events, trainings, etc. We want to make sure that people are aware of, various things, not just heat related issues. And with that, I will pivot back over to Mike to bring us home with some comments from my colleague, Becky.
Sure, thank you, Natalie. That was pretty thorough and a good back and forth in the questions. And we have a record of the transcript here too. So if any questions, I'll provide them to the department. If anything was not addressed, we'll try to follow up with who made it. So I believe you have a little more of a presentation to make for a couple of minutes. So we'll pivot now to Becky, I believe it is, Becky Hill.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to go over some of the other activities and efforts that occur within OCR. So some of these we're focusing on programs that I think would be most interesting to you all and something you might want to check out. So Resilient NJ is our planning assistance program that has various aspects to it that could help you with your resilience planning efforts. So we do provide direct assistance for local planning efforts on a regional and municipal scale. These opportunities really are contingent upon funding opportunities that we apply for or that we receive from federal and state sources. So my suggestion here would be keep an eye on the Resilient NJ website. We will put out notices and opportunities when we do have that funding and are looking for your interest and municipal and regional interest in participating. How the program works in that funding capacity is we have a list of pre-qualified consultant teams that we're able to procure on your behalf to do some of this resilience planning for you. We currently have 5 regions underway, a couple more planned. We have 5 municipal projects. Again, we're hoping to start a few more, kicking off with some new funding in the beginning of the new year. And then we also have the Resilient NJ Planning Toolkit. So this is a comprehensive list of the resources that are available to you to hopefully help you, I guess, move your planning efforts forward. So again, you can use that email address that Natalie provided to reach out if you do have follow-up questions, or we have a Resilient NJ email address, which I'll drop in the chat when I'm done talking, but just keep an eye on that website for some other opportunities. And then we also have some community-based and communication-based programs. So My Coast New Jersey and our community-based art grant program are some interesting programs that we've gotten into over the past couple of years. My Coast is, I guess it's a photo documentation platform to allow your community members to see flooding events in your area, to share out your flooding impacts. We're currently piloting some photo stations that will be installed this September. And the idea is to document our changing coastlines, so people have a better idea of, what's happening in their area. They can help document what's happening in your area. And then the community-based art grant program is a partnership that we do with the state's Arts Council, and we work with community-based organizations to provide funding to those organizations to then partner with an artist to develop community-specific artwork through community events and other engagement opportunities that help communicate how your community specifically will be impacted by climate change, but also provides information on what you can do about it, what you can do to feel prepared. And then finally, we have our Blue Acres program. This has traditionally been a program that has helped communities who are interested move out of harm's way. And the program is looking to transition to do some more forward thinking and planning with communities, talking about risk awareness and really highlighting the fact that some of our recent events are impacting unmapped or inaccurately mapped flood areas. So it's not always going to be reliable to look at historic flood information, and it might not be as protective as we once thought. So looking forward, thinking about how to help support communities in those planning efforts. So that is just a really quick overview I wanted to provide. Again, reach out. Thank you for putting those links in, Natalie, really appreciate it. So reach out if you have questions or want more information, we're happy to provide it.
All right. Thank you, Becky. Let's see, again, I believe we're ready to wrap up. We're approaching the 1 o'clock hour. If anyone has any remaining questions, raise your hand or drop them into the chat box in the next moment or two. But I'll do a song and dance for a minute to thank everyone. Thank the department, Natalie, Nick, and Becky in particular. Shamay, I know you're in the background helping us all out, and the staff at DEP. We will make this again available online via link, hopefully later this afternoon or certainly by tomorrow morning. And we'll be providing any follow-up information and questions as well. So keep an eye out in your email for a copy of the link. And with that, I hope everyone is able to cope with some of the heat that's coming our way in the next couple of days, according to the weather forecast. So stay cool, stay well, and hope everyone has a great rest of the week and summer. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you all so much for having us.